Now, I'm going to try to keep an eye on the chat in case anybody has specific questions, but I'm going to go through these kind of quick because I know I only got an hour to do my panel before the next one starts. And I did do a Twitch stream about this. Finally got it together in 2 parts the other day. Lots of technical difficulties, but it took almost 2 hours. So we're going to try to truncate it a little bit. I'll just try not to ramble as much. Anyway, when you're dealing with building, engaging NPCs, it really starts at the background level of your characters. Not all game masters require the characters to present a background or backstory, I should use, probably because background in 5th edition D&D means something slightly different. It's more of your profession before you became an adventurer, where backstory is the story of your life before you became an adventurer. And in your backstories, at least I like to recommend to my players that they give me 2 or 3 NPCs in the story that I can use to add to the immersion of the game. If you see somebody walking behind me, that's my girlfriend. We're all stuck at home, so you're going to possibly even hear her talk, because she'll be on a work call here in a minute, but she's going to try to take that elsewhere. Let's see, is everybody hearing me? Yes, that's right. I do have some informational videos that I have sent to Visioncon to put on their channel. They're on building encounters and building better boss battles. And I'll be doing the building encounters panel on Sunday. Yes, and as Matt Cook has pointed out in the group, I do run D&D with metagames, the Store League, as well as one homebrew game. So we like to present as much D&D as possible to the local community. We have so many games that are on hold right now because of the quarantine, but when we're up and running, we've got games going on 7 days a week. So if you're interested in learning about Dungeons and Dragons, 5th edition especially, we're always in that back gaming room. Someone of us is always there, including Visioncon's own Lucas Waldron is one of our DMs as well. Yes, hi Danica. I'll let her know when she gets off her call and I get off of this. Anyway, so like I said, when you get to building engaging NPCs, you really want to start at the background level. And what you do first off is take those background NPCs, the backstories that your players have given you, and try to plug them into your current gaming scenario if you can. Now, not all backstory NPCs will lend themselves directly to this, but if you can replace, like, for instance, someone who gives the hook to an adventure out, what in MMOs they would call a quest giver, if you can swap that quest giver out for an adventure with a character from somebody's backstory, they'll feel more involved and connected into the game. So right off the bat, you're engaging them by tying that more personal NPC into their game. Engaging the players is really kind of the goal of a role-playing game, where, like, board games and card games have more strict rules to follow. In a role-playing game, your NPCs are kind of the main signposts and guides that help the players go through the various challenges and navigate everything. And so they're going to be the ones that you use to give the players different kinds of information. Looks like everybody can hear me loud and clear. That's good. Let's see. Yes, definitely. Everybody should play at least once in their life, some Dungeons and Dragons. And really, I've been playing for 40 years. On my 7th birthday, DM'd my first session that afternoon, just to let you know how long I've been slogging through this. One of these days, I'm going to get it right. But no time like the present to try to share information on that. Now, like I said, when I do a building backstories panel, which is what I did last year at Visioncon, I tell people to give me, like I said, 2 or 3 NPCs in their backstory, and I only want like a brief backstory, like no more than 2 pages, no less than about a half a page. That's the good comfort zone there, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about that because this is a different panel. But in that backstory, I want people to give me like a mentor, you know, somebody who found the spark in them to become a mage, or the person who drilled them in the nature craft to become a ranger, you know, someone who helped inspire them to leave the small village or farm or city and go out adventuring. That mentor person could be one of the NPCs that you set up. And another NPC, quite often we have the tragic background kind of thing going on, and you might have a horde of orcs or goblins or gnolls that destroyed your village or raided your village when you were younger, and that head of that horde that gets away, it's his battle cry that haunts the character in the night when he remembers the fire and the raid and the death of all of his loved ones. And so that's another NPC that they have a special connection to, not a positive connection, but a special connection. And so if you can link some of those NPCs into your game, the history in your current story arcs, you can make the players become more engaged with those NPCs. So like a quest giver can be replaced by a merchant contact that you might have that came into your village selling his wares, or maybe the head of a traveling entertainers troupe who inspired you to want to go out and explore more of the world in the small town that your character grew up in. He could later on be the one that tells you some of the fascinating stories of Undermountain and get your players on the road to Dungeon of the Mad Mage or something of that sort. Might even tell you about the mines of Phandelver instead of the hooks that are provided in the modules, the pre-written modules. You can adjust those hooks with your own hooks. And of course, in your own homebrew adventures, you've got carte blanche to really use whatever it takes to bring the characters into the story without trying to railroad them. And that's what building an engaging NPC will help you do. Your biggest ammunition as a DM for guiding the story without railroading the story is using those NPCs. So tie it into the backstories and the background of the characters. If the characters picked a background that's specific to something like a sailor background, you know then that the characters are probably going to go to the wharfs and the dock areas to try to gather information and use that sailor's perk to possibly get free passage on a ship to get you to the encounter area. And so you can set up some interesting PCs beforehand, knowing that you have characters with that background, and you can have some of the sailors detailed on the ship a little bit more, and that's going to help you engage your characters. Now, the second thing I like to tell people, and this is probably the big thing, you're always telling your players to try to give their characters depth and personality. They have the goals and the bonds and the flaws in the player handbook of 5th edition, and other games have their own variation on goals and bonds and flaws and personality traits and motivations. Even the simple alignment system is linked to personality traits and how you are intending to play the character. When you set up your alignment, you set up these kind of things. That's really a declaration of the character. So give your NPCs some personality and depth too. Players are going to pick up on those NPCs that you've given a little bit more work on, and they're going to possibly pay more attention to those NPCs because of the fact that their own personalities are more in depth, more well-rounded, and actually engaging. And so if the NPC engages in your PCs, the PCs will engage in the NPCs. For those who are unfamiliar with some of these acronyms I'm throwing out, NPCs does stand for non-player character. NPCs, of course, player character. In a MMO terms, an NPC is a mob or a mobile. But it could be your quest giver, it could be your store merchant, it could be the innkeeper or barmaid, or it could be the duke or baron of the area that you're in. Those can all be NPCs. So give them personalities, and those personalities will shine out and bring your characters in. This is something that certain dungeon masters or game masters that you've watched online really excel at. The one that comes to mind for me, as somebody mentioned before we started the stream, the Critical Role fan group. Critical Role has one of the best personality developing dungeon masters that I've seen in all the time I've been playing. Matt Mercer. He really knows how to build a personality. In fact, his NPCs sometimes are more engaging than the player characters, not through any fault of the player characters, but just because of the fact that people watch the show wanting to see that NPC again. They want to see that little guest spot of Pumat Sol or one of those other characters come in. In fact, Pumat Sol is so engaging that Matt Mercer cosplays as Pumat Sol at conventions and interacts with the fans because they love that character so much. And a character that you can love, just like your characters in your favorite shows and your favorite books, those are the ones that you pick as your favorite characters. That's what you want your NPCs to become. Some of them you want them to bond with the player characters in some ways. Now, you will use various tools to do that. My next point is voices. Now, some DMs can handle voices, no problem, and no shame. I'm a one that loves to do voices. And old actors, those are the kind of thing I love to use. But there is by no means a mandate to use funny voices. You can go through your entire DMing career and never go into a funny voice. What you do when you don't do the funny voice, though, a trick you can do, because you may not have a talent in it. You just may not be really good at thinking up funny voices, or you don't want to sound too cheesy or comedic when you're running a more serious game. So instead of worrying about the voices, worry about the character's tone. Tonal quality can portray a lot of emotion in a character and a lot of individuality without having to necessarily do a voice. And then there's certain amorphous voices that are more about their tone than what they're saying. I mean, you could be doing a voice that technically counts as a NPC talking in another language that none of the player characters understand, and you're trying to get something across using the tone or even gestures and sign language not, like I said, necessarily ASL, not American Sign Language, although you can use it, but you could be using different hand gestures and facial expressions to portray the tone and the emotion and the personality that you want to put through. Good example of this from popular media, most of us might remember the old Peanuts cartoon where the adults, nobody could understand the adults because children listen, but they don't understand us. And so you would hear them go the wah, 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 wah. And that last bit portrayed an emotion, you know, that wah, wah sounds like maybe possibly disappointment or a negative is coming through. And it's that tone that you might portray in your NPCs. And you can do that in a language they do understand, but it kind of becomes more pronounced when you look at the example from the Peanuts. And these are the kind of things that you can use as tools to build your engaging non-player characters. There's a lot of people that come to this game nowadays, having watched Critical Role, having watched Acquisitions Incorporated or Dice Camera Action or one of these other streamed shows with phenomenal DMs that come in, and some of them are professional voice actors like Matt Mercer. You know, some are people that are just really good at portraying tones and stuff like Satine Phoenix. Some have been playing the game and doing voices and stuff for a long time. They may not be voice actors, but they're just so familiar with dropping into a voice that they really know what they're doing. And as far as that goes, people like Chris Perkins, who's on the design team for Dungeons & Dragons, these are people that have been doing this for a long time, and they really know how to use that tool in their toolbox. But they also know how to build a great story. So don't ever let your voices and your other things override your story. The story is still the part that the players are there for. They want to be involved, and you don't want to upstage your players. Your players are the stars of the story. The players are Tanis Half-Elven from the Dragonlance novels. The players are the different characters. They're Dris Duorden, they're Wolfgar. They're the characters that go on the adventures, and the NPCs are the extras. They're the ones that the players build bonds with and might have to rescue at some time. But don't upstage your players. But don't let your voices and your need to portray your engaging NPCs overshadow the fact that this is supposed to be about the players. So that's important. Now, in addition to having different tones, possibly different voices and personalities, NPCs also have goals. They each have a goal of their own. The NPC war chief of the orc band that destroyed that village, his goal is probably to capture slaves, take over land and territory, intimidate. Those are goals. The duke of an area, his goal might be to earn a higher title by being a good duke, or earn more money by squeezing every bit of taxes out of its subjects, or earn their adoration by being a generous duke. But they have goals. And remember that these goals aren't always either for or against the PCs. You know, not every NPC is on the player's side, and not every NPC is against the player. Some of them fall right there in between. In fact, the majority of them kind of fall more in the in-between. Sometimes their goals are in alignment with the players, so they're going to be more helpful. Not to say that they won't necessarily try to turn a profit while being helpful. And at other times, their goals are going to be contrary to the PCs, and they're going to provide distractions and roadblocks in the path of the PCs in the form of misinformation and side quests that takes them away from or possibly threatens even death to the PCs. So NPCs do have goals, just like the players have goals. You know, in the bonds and personality section of the 5th edition player handbook, you will see a lot of the goals are like to go out and redeem oneself for the wrong they did in their past. That's a goal. Or another goal might be to find a unique magic item or old family heirloom. That's a goal that we set for our players. Well, our NPCs have those goals too. The goal of Jafar in Aladdin was to get the lamp in order to gain power and take over as the Sultan of the kingdom. Then later on, the character of Aladdin manipulated Jafar and made him realize his goal was just power and manipulate him into wishing he was an all-powerful genie. Of course, he trapped him, which is one of the great things that your NPCs and your players will both get to do at different times, is leaving out just that one little bit of information that could change the whole attitude of a particular encounter, change the whole meaning of what they're doing, and lead people astray or defeat the bad guy. Your big bad boss like Jafar, like Maleficent, like these characters are definitely NPCs, and they definitely have goals. Even the smallest barmaid has a goal, even if it's just to feed her family or to marry off her, to a handsome adventurer. These are goals that they have, and you can use these goals to make the NPCs, whether they're human or not, make them more human, seeming to anthropomorphize the characters. Now, they may already be quadrupeds and stuff, don't need anthropomorphized in that sense, but to make them more human-like, to make them more like your sentient, civilized races, you give them goals, you give them personalities, then these will make the characters more engaging. Okay, somebody in the group was struggling with sentient magic items. How do I create an NPC in the form of magic items? It's scrolling out on me a little bit. That are important but not annoying or relevant. Well, first, why do you want them not to be annoying? Because sometimes the sentient magic items' whole purpose most of the time is to be just a little bit annoying. But if you don't want them to be annoying for some reason, that's fine. Different people do different things. First, take a sentient magic item and try to anthropomorphize it. Give it a goal. Look at the magic item that it's represented by. In fact, often sentient magic items in books and movies and TV shows were once humans or other sentient creatures that were trapped within the magic item, and they bonded with the item. So think of that and conceptualize it as an NPC first, then look at the item and see how that item's powers and abilities might link to the goals of the personality involved, or might be contrary to the goals of the personality. A pacifistic monk could have been imbued into a longsword. He doesn't even use long swords. He's pacifist. He doesn't want to enter battle. He's rather avoid battle. But the magic of the sword would rather have it, you know, powered up by drinking blood. Matt says the thing about creating NPCs for use of items is the same as for normal NPCs. A personality that it picks that entity. Unfortunately, the party will kind of decide if that NPC is important or not, or if it's memorable or not, and that's a great point. Visioncon did point out, our Visioncon representative, that poor DMs of the world, I make some interesting NPC, the party, no thanks, moves on. And there's more to that, and I'm not going to read it, the whole thing. I'm not going to click the see more right now, but I might go back and read it later. But they make good points. These are NPCs, and they're engaging, but you don't have any control over if the players actually are going to find that NPC interesting, engaging, or important. Just because you try to portray it as such doesn't mean that the players are going to play along. I paraphrase Sun Tzu in The Art of War, no battle plan lasts beyond the first engagement with the enemy. And in this respect, the player characters are the enemy. You're not in an antagonistic relationship with your player characters, except in certain settings, but they're one of their is to derail you as the DM and make you think on your feet. They like to challenge us, and so if you want them to go right, they're going to go left or up or down, and that's just going to throw your whole plan out the door. Looks like Colby has joined us in the chat room. Colby actually runs the Metagames Dungeons and Dragons League with us. He's the one in charge, so you would definitely get with him if you wanted to learn about games once this whole quarantine thing is over with. But yeah, as Matt was saying, and as people were asking, how do you make intelligent magic items with personalities? You start with the fact that it is a personality, it's a sentient item. Think of it as an NPC. Then put it in the shell of a magic item. Some of the greatest magic items I've ever seen were very annoying, and that's kind of the purpose of a lot of magic items. They care about their goals. They don't necessarily care about yours unless they are in line with theirs. The sentient Holy Avenger wants to go avenge great wrongs in the world, and it doesn't want you to take a rest to recuperate. It wants you to go constantly being out adventuring to right those wrongs and save those innocent and further the goals of the God that they're dedicated to, and so on and so forth. And it will sound nobler than thou sometimes when it's trying to talk to you and tell you to do that. I've had magic swords and magic items that were whiny. In one of my favorite series of books by, I believe it's Craig Shaw Gardner, it was the Maladies of Magic series, and there was a sword in that series that was all about beheading and killing, was the use of the magic sword, but the personality of the sword was it didn't want to fight anything, and it whined constantly. It complained about how it would get blood on its blade and how it wouldn't look pristine and neat, and it would be so much better if it was just like a dancing sword, you know, a sword that people did in dance routines and never killed anything and never dealt with blood. It had a blood phobia, and that was its personality, and it was annoying, but it was amusing and it was engaging. And that's what you try to do with your magic items. And if they don't bond, the players don't bond with that magic item or that NPC, move on. And that actually goes to one of my other points in the kind of a note sheet I have. And we're going to skip over to this one because this is the really the last point I was going to deal with, but that's okay. We can sometimes skip around, and this segues into it perfectly. You never know which NPCs the PCs will bond with. It could be that the PCs have a special connection with the guy that cleans up the bar after hours. He was just window dressing. You never even meant to give him a name, a backstory, a personality. It was just Fred over there in the corner. And some reason, the players decided to latch onto Fred and make him their drinking buddy. And he's the guy that they greet with welcome handshakes and broad waves and hugs when they get back from out adventuring, and they share a pint with him before he's on duty, and they get the gossip from him. And he was never meant to be the gossip giver, but that's the one that the players decided to bond with. Or it's the street urchin that the cleric in the group has showed some kindness to once or twice, and then it slowly, progressively stole the heart. Is a special project to help this waif get through in the world. And now that character that you barely spent a thought on has become a more important NPC in your game. And that goes back to the point in my kind of notes that I was going to handle before this. And this blatantly steals from other DMs. It's been mentioned on DM tips with Satine Phoenix. Some of these tips come from Teleus and Jaffe and Matt Mercer when they were on the show. And that is that you need to keep notes for all your on the are intended to be. You need to take notes, and you need to have notes ready to help flesh them out. Some DMs have like a list of dwarven names that they can randomly assign if they come up to a dwarven town and start engaging with them, and you need to give them a name instead of using a random name generator and then forgetting what name you gave them because you're figuring they're never going to come back to that guy again, and then they do. You could have a list of names, and when you move a name off of that list onto your more permanent notes about the NPC they encountered in that session, you have it ready if they decide to seek out that NPC again. I'm getting a little bit of the hiccups here. I'm sorry about that. So have notes like that. It goes into the personalities and the depth of the character. It goes into the voices and tones of the character. All the things that I talked about previously can be annotated in your notes because you never know what characters you're going to go back to, which characters are going to grab the character's attention. And so you need a way to quickly flesh out those characters, and you need a way to remember what you said 6 sessions ago about that character. I mean, if you don't remember, sometimes you can fake it. Sometimes you can figure that the information they got before might have been misinformation or misheard. You know, they may not remember all of it. Or you might get some of the players I deal with that write everything down that I say. You know, I copious amounts of notes, in which case they're more familiar with what's going on with the NPCs than I am. And let me tell you, as a DM, there's times when you're going to improv a whole session or two. In fact, the first 2 or 3 levels of you know, the game, you know, in tier 1, a lot of times I'm doing mostly improv for the first 2 or 3 levels till I've learned what personalities that these characters have gotten, until I've learned what their motivations are and which way they kind of want to go. Let's see. Evan Brickasek asked if I can give an example of one of my favorite or funniest NPCs backstories. Well, Matt Cook has been into my game, my homebrew game. He's no longer in it because of scheduling, but they met a merchant who's a road merchant named Honest Conrad. And Honest Conrad, it's not exactly his backstory, but his story, because he's one of several Conrads. Conrad's like a family or guild name, because there's all kinds of Honest Conrads, and they could be different races and stuff. And when you encounter Honest Conrad, he's there ready to sell you anything and everything out of his wagon. But when you ask him to look for something in his wagon, he will dive into the back and just start throwing stuff out the back while he's searching. And people are starting to make dexterity saves just to not get hit by the flying shrapnel as he's, disregarding the items that you don't want to try to find the one he thinks that you do want. And he'll tell you the story, sometimes if you quiz him, about how his family or clan or merchant house works and how they travel the land all over my homebrew kingdom. And they always seem to be where they're, well, I don't know if I want to use the word needed, but they seem to pop up out of nowhere all the time. And so he's a really interesting NPC. Then I have got NPCs that were caught in a polymorphy curse, and they're now a completely different race than what they grew up as, and they do their best to try to convince people that they're of that race. And in their backstory that they've related to the characters, they were cursed by a wizard or sorcerer or warlock to take this form, and the form is not nearly as appealing as what they say their original form was. And this could be a lie, and it could be the truth. You've got to dig deeper and find out. Our Visioncon representative was asking what are some of the least favorite traits to see in an NPC. Well, that's actually a great thing, because there's an overused trope in certain types of NPCs, specifically merchants. Every merchant of every new DM at some point is out to just stiff the players. That's their only goal, it seems like. Doesn't matter, from town to town. Every time you come across a merchant who's trying to sell you something, he's trying to cheat you. There's no helpful merchants. They might act helpful, but they're really just trying to get your money. And the better DMs out there, the ones that have gone through the trenches as players themselves, the ones that have read a lot more novels, the ones that understand that there's a different varieties out there, realize that not all merchants are out to get you. Yes, merchants want to make a buck. They want to make that gold piece off of you. But some merchants, like Pumat Soul, from Critical Role, realize that if they can help you now, and it's an item that they've got plenty of and they don't have to overprice it, you're more likely to go back to their store later to use them. And so the most irritating personality quirk that I've found in an NPC is usually a merchant trying to cheat you. Every merchant in the world wants to cheat you. And that's the one I don't like because of its overuse. It's overabundance in the game. It's so cliche now that it's too comedic, too slapsticky to go in a lot of more serious games. Sometimes you want your merchants to just be window dressing, and if the players don't engage them for gossip and rumors, you don't bother fleshing out all your merchants and make them all greedy asshats. You instead take those merchants and you make them kind of, you know, just that Walmart greeter guy who, hi, welcome to Walmart. Help you find what you're looking for, and they kind of help you find what you're looking for, and they charge you a pretty steady price. They may haggle, they may not, but they're not out to cheat you. Somebody else, I can't pronounce that first name, I do apologize, but Iron Stout is the last name. Sounds like a dwarven last name. You had mentioned NPCs upstaging players. Do you have any examples from personal experience? I myself try not to upstage my players, and I've always kind of done that because I did realize, I mean, I've been a player and a DM, and I started so young that I really got into the joy of the game before I got really overly competitive about the game. Just call you Bath. It is a dwarven character. Well, that works. Well met. Yeah, I personally don't try to upstage the characters. It's not saying I probably never have, but none of them really come to mind. But one of my best friends that DM'd some when I was younger, specifically in a game called Gamma World, which was also made by the original makers of Dungeons and Dragons. It was a post-apocalyptic mutant wasteland. He would always make NPCs that went along with the party, and then they would have phenomenal powers and abilities way above the characters at their level. They would be the ones that beat the bad guy, that did the majority of the damage, that upstaged them in every turn, and they did it under the guise of helping them. But the players quickly get fed up with that NPC, and it's a popular one for a lot of inexperienced DMs too. Inexperienced DMs see that the relationship between them and the players is antagonistic. They see that as a winning type of situation. They haven't learned yet that the joy of a role-playing game is more about telling a fantastic story and everybody having fun than it is about upstaging each other and winning the game. And so a lot of, especially inexperienced DMs or GMs, will create those tag-along, quote-unquote, followers and hirelings and quest givers that end up being Elminster All-Sage and having phenomenal cosmic powers that they can use to beat any challenge. It's like, well, then why did we send the player characters after this in the first place? That's the most irritating one that I can think of. That one gets me. The other one is, and this is something that I don't like in PCs, probably as much as I don't like in NPCs, and that's the edgelord. You're joining a group, you're going along with a group, and you constantly want to be contrary to the whole teamwork philosophy. So edgelords don't do well for any long term in most groups. Let's see, how do you like handling a scenario where a player kills an NPC that was created to help them? That happens a lot. Okay, there's a certain subset of D&D players out there, and it's not all just them. Sometimes it's a mistake. Sometimes it has something to do, you have to know the whole story behind it. But there's a group of players that it's more them than the mistake, and they're called murder hobos. They think that the game is all about killing for experience, like an MMO or a video game. It's all about getting those EPs or XPs. If you ever read the comic book Knights of the Dinner Table, by Jolly Blackburn, good friend of mine. He writes about murder hobo type players who they get into their characters and stuff, but they want to kill everything for experience. And how do you handle that? You remind the players that their actions have consequences. So if they murder somebody who's supposed to be helpful, for one, they don't get the helpful information as easily because they killed one of their sources of information. Two, if the local constabulary or allies of the person that they killed find out that they killed him, then they become hunted men and women. They are the marked men. They've got bounty hunters after them. They've got laws that they're actually wanting to put them in jail. I mean, if you've played in Waterdeep Dragon Heist, there's a whole list of laws and punishments in the criminal code of Waterdeep. And if you break one of those codes, which would include killing a citizen of Waterdeep, you're in trouble. And that's one of the things you got to do to handle it. You have to make sure that players do realize that when they do go around randomly hacking and slashing on people that are trying to be helpful, that there are consequences to their actions. You can make them feel really bad too by sprinkling little tidbits of information later on in the game. So they found out that that guard that they killed, that they never should have killed, was a family man, and he left, 4 orphaned children. Their mother had already died of a pox several years before, so now they've gone to an orphanage, and you find all of these things out in addition to the laws against it. Now, it looks like that we had another really good question. Couple of really good questions, and Visioncon said great question to at least one of them. Gabriel Tackett said, something I'm curious about is monster NPCs. How do you create NPCs that will be antagonistic, that the player will be more inclined to talk to than fight? Well, that's a conundrum that you have to deal with. See, players see monstrous races a lot of times automatically as the enemy. That's why bringing in the monstrous races as player characters can be a mixed bag. If you play the game, quote unquote, right, there's no right or wrong play to D&D, but if you role play it more accurately to a lot of situations, they're not going to instantly accept that bugbear character as a party member. And just like how that player has to ingratiate himself in game if he chooses to play a monstrous PC, so that NPC has to ingratiate themselves or has to prove that they're more powerful than the players, so that it might be more advantageous for the players to talk instead of attack, prove that they're intelligent enough that they can be reasoned with. Sometimes it's something as simple as the dragon talking to the PCs in common and addressing them, that makes them less monstrous and makes the characters at least think, oh wait, I can talk to the character. Like when Bilbo Baggins meets Smaug at the end of The Hobbit, Smaug starts talking to Bilbo, and Bilbo uses wordplay to get out of it instead of trying to just fight the dragon, because he had no chance against Smaug by himself. But he distracted Smaug long enough that he could get away, and learned a way to possibly take advantage of a weakness of Smaug while doing it. But he did talk because the dragon talked to him. So try talking to them, because if a monster instigates a conversation, initiates communication, and knows a civilized language like Common or Elvish, your players are going to be at least predisposed, because we're taught in culture to respond when people talk to us. So they'll be predisposed to at least have a short dialogue with those monsters. Now, it could be just trading threats and bravado, but this will, that's just Walmart calling about a prescription. Anyway, the other question, the other one, someone asked, do you find it difficult to run multiple NPCs at the same time, or do you stick with one or two at a time? That's another great question. I like to say that all DMs have to suffer from a mild case of multiple personality disorder. And sometimes it's just one personality driving the ship, and other times the DM has to play a crowd. It's best to focus on them one at a time, but you can, especially if you use voices or intonations to differentiate your NPCs, talk over each other. You can think of it as being a voice actor who's voicing multiple characters in a scene of a cartoon. And by swapping voices, you're swapping characters, or swapping tonal qualities, you're swapping characters, just swapping accents, you're swapping characters. And it's really great if you can do things like cut one NPC off with another NPC talking and make it more dynamic, but not everybody can do that. Hold on, I need to turn off that notice. My phone is going off. It probably left me a voicemail. There we go. Now let me turn off my volume on my phone, so I don't have to worry about that no more. Okay. But yeah, you have to be a little bit multiple personality to run multiple NPCs. For some of you, it's easier just to focus on one or two at a time, and there's nothing wrong with that. I like to ham it up and be people at once, and it gets confusing, and we might start mixing up our voices, and we might start mixing up our personalities, and that just happens. We're just about out of time, because the next one should be
in just a few minutes.
Kind of wrap it up. It'll be probably the last real question. The last real question. We'll round it out, though. Yeah, as they just told me, just a few minutes. So, oh, thank you very much, Beth. And I try to be as helpful as possible. I've been teaching people for a while. But we're going to round it up with that last question. Basically, do what you're comfortable with as a DM. You do try to push yourself once in a while, but realize you can always back up and go with what you're comfortable with, because you're meant to have fun at the game table too, not just produce fun for everybody else. The DM is also a player, and they're meant to have fun. So if it makes you uncomfortable to do voices, don't do voices. If it makes you uncomfortable to portray 15 NPCs at once, focus on one or two at a time. If it makes you uncomfortable to really personify the villain, try doing it offhanded with stories and stuff, and don't use a lot of villains that have a direct personality. See, Visioncon is thanking me for this. Everyone needs to play at your table after it is safe to be out. And I do love playing with new players, although currently, if we go back to our old schedule, I DM 2.5 games a week and play into 2 games a week. And I say half because one of my games is an every other week game. And that one I might be resetting as it is, because I've lost a few players with various schedule changes recently, and I'm going to need to approach the ones that are still there. And I'll probably be recruiting. And that one is a homebrew. It's Saturday nights at Metagames. But I'm going to wrap this up, turn it back over to the wonderful people at Visioncon. they've done an amazing job pulling this together in such short kind of notice after Corona hit us. And since I work with a sister con, the Gaming Arts Media Entertainment Expo, I know what it takes to herd ducks like this. And I give them total props for putting this together.
Doc, you are so sweet. Thank you so much for all you do. I was listening
Thanks, Brandon.
and I was muting and cutting my video, but I was listening in, and I gotta say, I love the game D&D. I've only played a few times, but you know, I feel like I learned a lot. The merchant story that you were saying, like to how to have a better merchant, I'm definitely guilty of. The one time I actually DM'd a campaign was very short. It's like a day because we realized I kind of sucked at it. But yeah, I was definitely guilty of that merchant trope. So I personally am going to keep that in mind the next time if my friends ever let me DM. But thank you again so much, Doc. We all loved your panel, and we'll see you soon.
Definitely. I have another panel on Sunday. I'll be here for that. And we run even some seminars and stuff sometimes at Metagames to help try to get people to learn DM. We want Colby and the people at Metagames to see when we're going to do those kind of things.
Well, awesome. Well, we'll get all that info from you on Sunday. And thanks again, Doc, and I'll see you later.
Okay. Bye-bye.